Talk me through though what happens with spices, herbs and spices fraud, and how you go about testing that to make sure it is, that my oregano isn't grass or something.
Leaves. The problem comes whenever it's ground powders, because it can be anything. So in the likes of garlic powder, you have the potential for things like chalk or starches and flours being present. So you would hope that those committing the frauds are aware of health and safety risks, because no one wants to be eating something that's going to cause a health problem. So there's always that hope that there's some sense of sensibility in those criminals that will look at health risks. The last thing we want is another melamine type scandal that happened in China.
I suppose the thing that Chris was making this point, that these people are trying to make money, they're not trying to make people ill. And I suppose if you you only get to make everyone ill once, but if you can keep passing it off, that could happen. That could happen for a long time. Let's bring Ron in now. Ron, I was looking at this. It's amazing. I was looking back at some of these cases. I think about 2017, the Hebridean sea salt collapsed after it was claimed that its salt, which is marketed as being harvested by hand on the Isle of Lewis, was actually made up of 80% table salt. And it goes, basically, salt, you think, is the sort of cheapest, most straightforward of things, right the way through to much more expensive things being part of his things. What sort of things have you found in Scotland in your work with the Scottish Food Crime Incident Unit in Scotland?
Yeah, well, we were involved in the case that Chris mentioned, the one with Hebridean sea salt, and it was sea salt, high quality salt, which was cost a fair bit of money, and it had been adulterated or had been substituted with lower quality salt from Israel, actually. But we've found other things. Saffron, because we've been on the topic of herbs and spices, saffron, we've found saffron issues in Scotland. And if you think about saffron being probably the most valuable spice globally, we found that to be adulterated with floral waste. So pure saffron, and there's specific guidelines in terms of how much floral waste should be in that. And I think for your top quality, it's about 0.5%. We found 57% floral waste.
Wow.
In the samples that we looked at. And if you think about that, it's almost like drugs. It's almost like drugs, because if you're bulking that product out, you're doubling the value of it. You're doubling the money that you're going to make on that product.
But like drugs, sometimes what's been cut into it might not be as safe as the thing that you thought it was.
Well, that's right. And I think we've always got to be wary of that, because if you think of those individuals out there who have an allergy to something, food fraud's an incalculable risk to them. They've got to trust what's on that label. But what I would say is, just commenting on Chris's point, it's about money, and people, those criminals aren't going to make an awful lot of money if they make people ill.
Yeah, it's straight off.
It's going to be a one-off shot for them. You know what I mean? And that's not what they're in it for. They're in it to make money.
Yeah. Ron, there was a couple of years ago, the Food Standards Agency sort of identified several threats that they thought there were to the food chain. I just wondered if you'd come across any of these. There was the idea of sort of sheep rustling, stealing livestock, and that meat then ending up into the food chain. And also, and I hadn't really come across this before, but people buying and selling food on websites like Facebook and eBay, which are obviously not regulated in the same way when it comes to buying and selling food. Have you come across either of those things in recent times?
Not in recent times. I think we work very closely with Police Scotland here in terms of animal theft, and there's always that concern about illegal slaughter of those animals and them finding themselves into the food chain. And it's back to, I suppose, the warning that was given earlier about cheap products. And if something seems too good to be true, then it probably is. And I know that it's a bit of a cliche, but it's probably the best advice we can give consumers out there. You should try and shop locally. You should try and shop within established businesses, because that type of problem is out there, and there's a potential that the risk is there for that to raise its head, I suppose, again, because of the rise in cost of living. It is a perfect storm, I suppose, at the moment in terms of everything that's going on. And that puts pressures on consumers, and it puts pressures on businesses as well.
You're just finding your advice as well then, Terry. How can people, when they're buying their herbs and spices, try to make sure that they haven't got all sorts of chalk or whatever mixed in with it?
From my angle, it's really about who you're buying from. Know your source. I know the larger retailers definitely have a testing in place that helps monitor their products. So just make sure you trust your source and know your source, and trust that they are putting the testing in that's needed. They use all forms of risk analysis to identify where the problems are coming from. So that would be my advice.